name is Kathleen Stevens. I am 60 years old. I just had my Hwangap, and I was a member of K35, the 35th group of Peace Corps volunteers to come to Korea. We arrived here in July of 1975, very hot, and I was here until 1977, September of 1977 when I completed my service. So I really feel like I've been the most fortunate of people in seeing Korea, if you like, 3 times. First in the 1970s, and then again in the 1980s, and finally from 2008 to 2011 as the U.S. ambassador. Korea has had an incredible journey, and it's something that I will reflect on, and I hope contribute to in some way for the rest of my life. As I think about Korea's extraordinary modern journey and where it's still going to go.
I was motivated to join the Peace Corps because I wanted to teach. I had a degree in education, English education, and I did not have a full-time job in Ohio. I was working in McDonald's part-time and substitute teaching, and going to the Peace Corps and coming to Korea sounded a lot more attractive than that. I knew that I wanted to serve as a teacher, and they gave me an opportunity to do that.
And my first reaction was, I'm not sure I want to go to Korea. I thought, I'm not sure where Korea is, so I had to go to an atlas and look exactly where Korea was. So I said, I think I should sleep on this for one day before I make a decision. So the next morning I woke up and I thought, this is a good opportunity, I should give it a try.
So I remember talking to the Peace Corps office over the phone, and they had called me up and said, oh, how about English education in Kenya? And I said, Kenya? Oh, okay, give me 2 days to think about it. And back then you didn't have the internet or anything to check on that, so I had to go to the public library. I read about Kenya, looked up about Kenya, and 2 days later I called back Peace Corps. I said, okay, I'll go to Kenya. And they said, sorry, no more openings. And I said, really? So I was really disappointed, and they said, how about Korea? I think Korea followed Kenya in the alphabet, K-E and then K-O. And because I didn't want to lose the chance to go into Peace Corps, I said, Korea, 가겠습니다. I'm going to go there. And we had a little interview, and after the interview, the process went on, and I came to Korea, and that's how I wound up coming here. And so that's why I really think it was fate. I might have gone to 2 other countries, and I wound up coming here.
I think my experience was the first time in my life that I did something that was very adventuresome. I was always a very shy, withdrawn person, and coming to Korea was something that took a lot of courage for me to do. And while I was here, I felt like I had very close relationships with the people I came to know in my town as well, and everyone treated me like a Korean.
And I was given an assignment teaching adult education in Suwon at the Office of Rural Development, which has since become the Rural Development Association or Agency. I taught English to extension workers and agricultural researchers.
And I was actually the first volunteer that was allowed to teach at the elementary school. In addition to those duties, I also taught at Dongguk University.
What I remember most about being a middle school teacher and working in the Chunhakyo was how different it was from American schools. We had 65 or 70 students in a class, and we didn't call the students by name. We only called them by number. 22번, 일어나, 34번, 일어나. And the children would stand up, but sometimes they were very shy, and they'd put their head down, their face down. I thought they were very cute.
I was here tuberculosis control worker, quality
Good, but I did get to see a lot of Mudong services. As a health worker, when our services failed, the Mudong would come from sunset to sunrise and do exorcisms and take care of the sick. There was one doctor, he's now in the United States, I found out recently. His wife died and he moved to the United States. There was one Western doctor that I worked with. There were 3 Mudong, and they took care of most of the medical needs.
My job in the health center was mostly in patient management. My coworkers always skillfully used my status as a foreigner to help motivate patients. The cycle was patients would be detected with TB and would enter a 2-year drug treatment program. The challenge was, after a few months, the symptoms of TB would disappear and the patients would lose their motivation to continue taking the pills. They had to take numerous pills every day.
I have a very vivid memory of a trip to the East Coast when we were on a bus, and the bus was going into an area that had a cholera outbreak. Cholera is a very dangerous, infectious disease, and it was something that happened in Korea frequently, unfortunately, when we were here. And the passengers on the bus were required to sit on the bus while a doctor came down with a needle to inoculate everybody on the bus before they continued on to prevent them from being infected with this very serious disease.
While at the school, my main job was to help with doing research. I worked on the research of a squatter resettlement program throughout the city, but also especially in the Daksan area. This was called Shimin Apartment. And the reason that I stayed another 6 months was to complete a scientific study of the apartments based on where the squatters were resettled, and to see if the location affected their living arrangements and how they could get a job and so on. I was asked by the Seoul city government to give a report. Myself and a Korean co-worker published an article in the Korean Journal of Housing about the Shimin apartments, and everything I needed to do was completed while I was in Korea for that study.
Most memorable, well, also while we were in Seoul, we did a project with Terrazone, an organization similar to Doctors Without Borders, where we were working at the Seoul Children's Orphanage, setting up a medical facility to take care of in the summertime it would be 2,000 orphans, and it would swell to 3,000 by the winter time. And I think that had a large impact on my stay, and ever since.
I taught many English classes. I'll tell you, I taught many English classes in that year, even when I was Heapasumida. But so after finishing the Peace Corps, I taught biology in American high schools.
We were very similar in many ways, and it was exciting to know that. I got up for work the same way they got up for work. We both had our issues at school with students, some good, some bad, but we learned together.
You got invited a lot out to tea houses with Korean students who wanted to have more English conversation. And several of the girls were very ambitious, I should say. They really wanted to learn English, and they would invite me to go to coffee houses, tea houses then, or different places just to talk and learn learn English. I wanted to learn Korean, so we often ended up, I would speak to them in Korean and they would answer me in English, and so we worked on our language together that way. It was quite interesting.
And in the article there was a list of LDCs, and on the list was South Korea. My students were appalled. They said, "Why is South Korea on this list? We are not less developed." They truly were astonished, and they were angry, and they said, in effect, they said, well, we'll show, whoever did this list, we'll show you who's less developed. My students knew what was going to happen. They knew they were not less developed. They knew what was coming down, and that was another example of the energy and the intensity.
In the late 70s and early 80s, there was lots of poverty, which was also very memorable. I remember walking in the countryside, and there were some farmers who had a small manual tractor, and there were some who had an ox, and there were some who were using human plows. The yoke would actually go on a person, and someone would plow behind it. I felt sorry for the wife of one farmer who wore the yoke and pulled the plow by herself.
It was difficult when I lived in the Yogwan, but it was fun. I mean, we washed our clothes on the board in the cold. We had to get up in the morning and break our toothpaste because it was frozen. The ice was frozen. We had an undul floor. We were hot on the bottom, but everything above us was freezing cold. That was hard. We had a lot of little rats in our rooms, but we managed to deal with that. The food was wonderful, but it was so good, I just ate a lot of kimchi that I got really sick.
Okay, and so that was different. And it was different also only to bathe maybe once or twice a week at the Mogyoptang. But I loved to go, and I loved when the ajumones took the Italy towel and they scrape, and you squeak when you're finished. And then you use wonderful lotions, and it was a wonderful feeling. So when my parents came, I took my mother there to a Mogyoptang for that experience because it was so different from being home.
And I loved Naksansa. It's right on the coast with a beautiful view of the ocean, and you can see Seoraksan and everything. And when I felt lonely or discouraged, which happens sometimes, I would go to Naksansa and I would feel refreshed and energized and feel good again and recharged. Yeah, so I loved Naksansa and Seoraksan.
There was a harmony and a harappuji that I would visit as my favorite patients. And every time I would visit their small little house in the Shigo, they would go to their chicken coop and go get a fresh egg and break the egg and put it into a cup for me to drink. And it wasn't my favorite thing to do, to eat a raw egg, but it was just a sign of their hospitality and generosity. And I think that's the best memory.
Every morning during the second year, a grandmother would appear at the window of my room and hand into me a bottle of goat's milk. She said that because I was alone in Korea, she was sure that my family missed me, and she wanted to help out.
But the best thing about the 2 years that I was here was I was fortunate enough to live with a family. And I was assigned to the family. I lived with them the entire time, and I was adopted by the family. I have my Korean name with the family, and I was adopted by the family, and that is very, very important to me.
Through my Korean friends, I had a chance to attend Korean funerals, Korean weddings, celebrations of 100-day birthdays or hangaps. I had a chance to visit many different cities in Korea. So it was wonderful to have that kind of connection.
One unforgettable memory of Seoul at the time is taking the buses and the chajang, the young girls who rode on the bus to collect the tickets. They wore uniforms and they spoke some English. They'd say, all right, stop, and bang the side of the bus. I guess young Koreans don't have any memory of that, but that's a unforgettable memory.
또 다른 사람이 있어요. 그때는 저 하수집 선임, 권태 선이라는 사람이 있었어요. 그 처음에는 뭐 친절한 사람 아니지만은 그 밖에서는 한 번만 와서 그 나한테 술 한 잔 하러 저 가더라고 저 말을 했습니다. 그래서 우리는 술 하면서 얘기했어요. 저 우리 하수집 딸은 뭐 나한테 저 한국말 배웠는데 근데 나한테 얘기했어요. 그 여자 말만 배웠는데 그 남자 말 배워야 되겠습니다. I should learn to speak like a man. 그래서 나때 농담하면은 오마나 소리 했죠. 그래서 내 아들 좀 오마나 했는데 그래서 그렇게 하지 마라. 여자 같은 말인데 그래서 재미있어요.
They arranged to make this record of all Peace Corps volunteers, and one song in it was "There'll Be No Tuberculosis Tomorrow."
I have some things in my home. When I was in the country people thought everything new is good. So they were getting rid of all their old things. And one Howman gave me a big black bowl. And she was going to break it or give it away for stainless steel. So I bought her a stainless steel bowl, and I took that pot and put it in my trunk. When I came home, it came with me. So I went just recently to Edi City, and they have the Paekche Dynasty Museum. And the curator said to me that maybe that bowl I have is from Paekche. So I will take pictures of it when I get home, send her the pictures, and if she wants it, I will bring it back or send it back to Korea to return something Korean.
To the point of which, when we went back to America 7 years later, I was very uncomfortable in my own country. I couldn't understand why people would wear their shoes and get their floors dirty and have their babies crawl on the same floor that they walked on with shoes. And I couldn't convince my father to take his boots off when he came in my house, and this was a big problem for me.
And when I left Korea, the day I left, they all came to the airport to say goodbye to me. And that's another one that I remember very strongly.
My experiences with after Korea, when I left, the impact that it had on me was that I learned that I was a teacher. I did not know that I had teaching skills until I actually had the opportunity to experience that during Peace Corps.
So after Peace Corps, I went back to the States and got a master's degree in special education. And I taught special education, high school and middle school. And then several years ago, I quit that job and taught ESL while taking care of my parents.
When I went back to the United States, I told people all the time that I was in the Peace Corps. Oh, the Peace Corps, they still have that? And then they'd ask, where were you? What did you do? And of course, I was always proud to tell everyone that I'd been in Korea.
And he understood this difficulty as an Asian problem. And so I could explain to him that the Japanese are one people, and the Koreans are another people, and the Chinese are another people. They don't think the same way. Their cultures are not the same. They are very, very different. And Americans, I think, didn't tend to see Asia and the world differentiated that way as different groups of people with different hearts and different minds and different cultures. So
I would ask a question and everyone would be too shy to answer, and this is now, 2 days ago. And they don't giggle, and they were just the same. It was wonderful.
What I remember most is the friendships that I developed. One of the reasons, being the only American there, I didn't have an opportunity to hang around with other Americans. So I avoided that temptation, and I spent most of my time with my co-teachers, especially one teacher who was very close to me, Han Du-suk. I got a little emotional because I came back in 2002 and for the World Cup and found that Mr. Han had died 2 weeks before I was here. So when I think of that, I still, regret not being able to see him again.
Old friends who still remember. It's amazing that these people, after 40 years, 44 years, 45 years, can still remember who I am, remember my name, and they were just, it's just been so exciting to see the changes in Korea, but to see that the people still have the strong feeling and the really strong hospitality.
Many times I thought there were 3 pieces to the Peace Corps purpose, and the third one was, you guys helped me, but it was to bring what we learned here back to our own country. And I often felt that was the most valuable one for the whole Peace Corps in terms of the United States. We sent all these people around the country, around the world, to learn how other people think, and then they came back to the United States and were able to interpret the world for other people.
One of my best memories of Korea was how generous the Korean people were to us and how well they treated us. And I would walk down the street in Busan or go into a shop and someone would stop me and say, "Are you an American?" I would say, "Yes." I said, "Thank you, just for being an American and for what your country did." And that was just very touching, and I was always just so surprised because I thought, well, I didn't do anything, it wasn't me, but to think that we would be met with that kind of gratitude was amazing.
I feel like I took away more than I gave.
Well, and I think you hear that from Peace Corps people worldwide, that you go thinking you're going to change the world and things, and then you wind up feeling so grateful for what you've learned. And I've heard that from we've been involved in return Peace Corps groups in the States, and that's been a repeated theme through a lot of people. And I'm sure
one of the longest lasting influences is the food. And my children have been raised on kimchi jjigae and japchae. Of course, as a man, I couldn't cook when I was in Korea. I wasn't allowed in the kitchen, but I had to sneak in to learn how to cook.
What's most important is how wonderful the Korean people are. Just tremendously respect their ambition, their intelligence, their sensitivity, their warm heart. I have many, many deep Korean friendships, and my life has been changed completely by my Korean experience.
If I could go back to those days, I think I wish I had focused more on providing the technical assistance, and wish I had been a better teacher in the schools that I taught. But I can't go back. I'm grateful for the time that I had, and I would recommend doing this to anybody. Peace Corps.
But I would do it again in a heartbeat. I wish I could go back to those times. I would have some contact with Korea, but I'm still shocked to see the modernity of Korea and how they've prospered. And I feel happy for all the progress, but I can't find anything. It's all totally changed.
And I mean, I can go on and on about the intensity of the experiences in Korea, and they've lasted a long time. It's a very, very important part of my life, and I try to explain that and talk about it with other people. Fortunately, I was able to bring my older son with me. My wife had passed away last year, and so my older son is with me, and I hope he's really getting a sense of what his father did at his age, or how this extraordinary country has, I guess the expression might be a time warp, how the progression has been so great in the last 40 years. And this has been a wonderful and extraordinary experience that I will never forget.
It's entirely different. And the younger people that will see this would I don't think they can realize how things have changed. And I saw pictures of in 1943, 44 in Seoul. There was nothing in the city. Absolutely, it was all rubble. It was all destroyed. And to see it now, it's I've been to cities all over the world, and I've never. They say that New York City never sleeps. I would say that's more than true here in Seoul. I can't believe all the traffic. And last night I fell asleep on the bus. And
Korea has remained in my mind and in my heart all these 35 years since then. So we've been married 35 years and are really delighted to be celebrating these 35 years here now.
한국 여자하고 결혼하게 되었습니다. But I had a wonderful time in Korea and I will never forget it.
It was great. I loved it. I'm ready to cry right now. It was such a wonderful experience. This is such a wonderful country, what you have done, and hats off to you.
They worked so hard. So it's wonderful to see all the changes that have occurred. And it will be interesting to continue to watch to see how Korea takes care of those new problems that they now have.
In the world. And I run into Koiko volunteers all the time in the middle of nowhere. I'll find a Korean-looking kid will be walking by me, and I say something to him in my very fractured Korean now, and he turns around shocked, and I discover that, of course, he's a Koiko volunteer. And so congratulations to Korea for actually doing that and for understanding their responsibilities for what it means at their economic growth to give back to not only to themselves in terms of the growth of the economy and their social structure, but also to those in the world who are a little bit less fortunate.
I always thought about the Korean experience, not because it's directly comparable, it's not, but because it always gave me a belief that things that people said were impossible could actually happen if you tried hard enough and if you worked hard enough at it.